Everyone out there. I am so thrilled to be on my first Better Humans of Work of 2024. And I have the joy of being joined by Jen Murray, who is founder and CEO of the High Vibe Healing Collective, where they invite leaders and change makers to get curious, stay patient, breathe intentionally into their heart-aligned, equitable leadership. I have to go back to that heart aligned piece. I have a story I'm going to share, but I'm going to finish your bio first, and then we can hear about our backstory. Jen is a certified breathwork facilitator, energy work practitioner, and white accountability advocate whose transformative work extends beyond the individual level. And they believe that the power of intentional community building and collective healing to create systemic change, centering the lived experiences of communities from the global majority and historically excluded groups. So thank you so much for joining me today, Jen.
Thank you for the honor, Dr. V. I'm so glad to be here. It's a joy. It's a joy and a total pleasure to be, part of the new beginning. And again, I think intentionally and consciously breathing new ways of being. And so, as I think we mentioned before we hit the live go, get started button, I really invite people, wherever you are right now, to go ahead and just take a moment to possibly bring yourself into a practice of presencing. And what I mean by that is really arriving. Like, how are you going to show up in this moment? If this is a time where you're taking a walk for yourself or getting some movement in because you want to get a little exercise and you're just tuning in to the audio portion, I just invite you to go ahead and just possibly take a little bit slower pace. If you're in a place where you're in a public environment, possibly it's just like taking your fingertips and touching them to each other, something that really brings you right here, right now into the embodied present moment. And so for me, it's the breath. And so I'm going to invite you to go ahead and just take 3 cleansing, grounding, calming breaths with me, in through the nose and out through the mouth. And we're just going to get present to being here on this better humans at work and workplace wellness conversation. So in through the nose and out through the mouth. Possibly you're letting out a sigh of relief because you're letting go of whatever you've attached to throughout this day and bringing it in again and out. And one final time, we're going to go in through the nose and out. Now just noticing in your body what's alive, where are you needing to be in most connection at this moment, and hopefully this conversation that we're about to have will spark a possibility and a potential for transformation and an opportunity for a little bit of your first breath experience in a rebirth. And with that, I'd love for you to share a little bit, Dr. V, about how we got connected and the transformation and experience we got to share together.
Absolutely. So Jen and I certainly share the diversity, equity, inclusion space. We met at a DEI summit. That was in Memphis.
Yes.
Yeah, it was super fun, and I got a taste of the type of work you do. I remember we were doing some breathwork exercises when you were presenting there, and then I got the pleasure of seeing you again on the Voyage of Empowerment. We have to add Ashley and Empowering Difference team over there, where Jen just led these phenomenal sessions, and it was every morning. I embarrassingly didn't make it to all of them.
It's okay. It's okay. You got what you needed.
But it was that first night on the cruise where I feel like you and I really bonded, Jen, because I was having some seasickness. I can't remember the last time I was on a boat or on a cruise at all. And Jen shared this really great analogy. And I remember they came up to me and they're like, all right, we need to reframe. And instead of thinking of it as sickness, as nausea, think about it as you are in utero and you're just, floating around in that amniotic fluid, and we're all in this together, and we're going out to sea, down to Bermuda in this particular case, but we're going out to sea, and whenever we come back on on land, that's the rebirth. And the coolest part, our doc was in New York City, so like you literally got to see the Statue of Liberty. Think about, like, you know, at least my ancestors, how they came into America. And you know, usually, and I've said this a few times, I'm like, I was like, Jen, that's a little woo woo for me, but I'm into it. I'm into it. I was, and that was right after I got I had a short but mighty fight with cancer, and I was on the healing process. I still am technically, which is wild. And I really did feel that coming back to land after that trip, it was a next chapter for me. You know, and with each chapter comes rebirth. And so ever since then, I'm like, okay, we need to be friends. And yeah, I'm really glad
Yeah.
we're in each other's orbits.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I really appreciate you bringing forward, this idea of like what is in our roots and how do we nourish and nurture our roots. And I think in a particular, like what are we accountable to in our own ways in which we show up in the way we do this work. And so I think that when we're thinking about building a bridge between a topic that's incredibly heavy in our world right now, diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging, and it's not just heavy, but it's also really fraught with so many different politicized and polarized perspectives. I think it's so critical for us to really hold the intention of centering people's well-being at the core and at the heart of the work that is being done, because it really is that we do inclusivity work, we do belonging work with the intention that we're actually propelling and furthering the dimensions of togetherness and doing this like we are well, and really creating that we are wellness. And ultimately I think that there is a we that's within well-being, and it's the way in which we start all of our well-being work is in a collective and in a community of practice and praxis. And so it was a total honor to be, I guess, doulas for each other in that journey across the sea. And I have affectionately referred to my sibling who lives across the ocean. I oftentimes say that we're siblings across the sea, and across the seas, I think we oftentimes still have that familial tie of like, what is our root, what is our origin, and what are those stories that we can return to, that is oftentimes encapsulated in the moment we took our first breath. And so thank you for sharing the transformative potential of, really embodying a journey of death, dying to old parts of ourselves, and, birth and rebirth, bringing in and breathing in new ways of being and new ways of belonging.
So I feel like Jen and I, we have this like Venn diagram, and you are very workplace wellness, but breath work, mindfulness, and then I'm over here as this organizational psychologist. But the overlap is this. It's this workplace wellness piece. And I know
Absolutely.
I've said in the past, like I wish the way we have these P&L charts or shareholder reports, like what are these key dimensions, key metrics that people are being held accountable for. I've always said, well, employee well-being needs to be on there. Yeah,
Yes.
at a bare minimum, I would take engagement, but that's a bare minimum. I want a holistic measure of employee well-being. But before we get to measurement, we need to have a definition. So how do you, Jen, define workplace wellness?
Excellent. So for me, I'd really say that workplace wellness is multidimensional. And I think about it as you're bringing in, there's workplace wellness for the individual. And those are oftentimes programmatic offerings, the things that are within like the benefits package, the dimensions of like maybe outside of work, you're going to the gym, or outside of work, you're taking your walks with your family out in nature, or outside of work, you're going to the meditation class. Perhaps maybe you're taking a lunch break and you're having like that workplace wellness piece happen inside of the work. However, more importantly, like workplace wellness is actually a structural and systemic it's a systemic piece that needs to be examined. And you could only, as well as your workplace culture will put forth the emphasis on well-being. And I say well-being because we're in a world of well-doing, and a lot of times we want to do well or do good, and that's really just reinforcing tenets of white supremacy culture, and absolutely like having people live into ways that don't feel aligned and or real for them. I mean, it's oftentimes like people feel like they're really squished into a box and living out of a label or defined by diagnoses. And so all of those things are typically, I think, what the world of healthcare would define well-being as. And for me, well-being really is multifaceted and holistic, and it really holds the mind, the body, the heart, and the spirit. And in the workplace, it's unified by the breath, and by every breath that we have and every exchange that we have with the people on our teams and in our constellation of community in a workplace.
So I just wanted to make sure I had two follow-up questions on that. So the first
Love it.
one was, can you dig a little bit more into, it's kind of a two-part question. So can you dig a little bit more into the distinction between well-being and well-doing? And
Yes.
relatedly, you mentioned white supremacy culture. So like how I predict white supremacy culture is more on the well-doing side than the well-being side. But first off, what's the difference between the two? And then how does white supremacy play into all of it?
Absolutely. So well-being for me literally has that beginning of the word, which is be, and I use that as an acronym because I came out of the land of LGBTQ plus work and doing gender and LGBTQ plus justice work, and so I oftentimes like find myself creating acronyms out of everything. But B really means balancing energies, and it's really like understanding that there's a dynamic component to wellness. It's not like it's something that's static or stagnant. Well doing is really like, this is what people said I should do. It's a lot of shoulding and a lot of problematic. I always say to my children, don't should on yourselves, but like really there is no way to like sort of tell people like how to do wellness for themselves. It's a discovery, and it's really like an inner journey and an inner process of discernment as to like really what creates that sense of well-being inside of you. So distinction is being versus doing really is the separation there, and one is like very much about like societal conditioning and socialization. So there is how it ties into the white supremacy culture. A lot of times it's like as many people have said in racial justice work, it's the air that we breathe, it's the like water that we swim in, it's this pervasive component of cultural establishments that are entrenched in really creating a sense of hierarchy and dominance, and really not allowing for people to show up in a work that is the we within wellness or well-being. And that we is really about like working together and working as a team to create kind of a sense of greater well-being, but also greater expression and contribution to the world through your workplace.
I love that. I love that. And, I often use the phrase, this workplace wasn't built for me, them, whoever I'm talking to, right? Or talking about. And I think it's another good indicator. And it's a really good example of when we do well-being work right, which I would argue is part of DEI. Everyone
Absolutely.
benefits when you do DEI right. Everyone benefits. Like I'm so sick of the zero sum game. Like who is benefiting from being sick? Who is benefiting from that? It's no one.
Right. And I also I like to weave the two together, and I'm working right now on writing some pieces that are related to actually well-being and understanding that like there's a we that is within well-being, but it's also like fueled by like eyes that can be really like it can really be inner and like are inspirational, are like all these things that are really like uplifting. But there are a lot of toxic eyes that come out of white supremacy culture and dominant paradigms that operate. And those toxic eyes, individualism, insurrection, all the things that really like separate us and keep us at a distance from one another and from understanding and exploring and seeing our humanity is really, I think, where I would root that in. Just to like help to know that I think that there is a really important need for us to see that like DEIB work is only as effective as our well-being work is. Because if we aren't seeing everyone as inherently whole, innately valuable, and also like innately worthy, we're not actually creating workplaces where people actually can be well.
And my mind is going about thinking about what is the outcome, like what is, because as you said, these various activities, like it doesn't matter if it's what we should be doing. I love have a case of the shoulds, but what is going to result in that internal that felt well-being, and that's a place where us organizational psychologists thrive, because you can't nor should you measure everything from like a Likert scale, from that self perspective, but this truly does matter. And I pulled up a couple examples of what this subjective well-being measure would be. Something like this idea of satisfaction with life. So overall, how satisfied are you with your life? And you need to be healthy. You need to have a clear brain. You need, like the methodologies that we've been talking about a little bit feed into that. Where there's, how do you feel about your life as a whole? And then they have a 7-point response range going from delighted to terrible. Is this so? I'm just like nerding out over this.
I love it. That is amazing, because I do think, thank you for sharing. I think that is like a really incredible like frame to sort of say that again. I think that we oftentimes don't look at the nuances of that type of a scale, because we live in a binary emphasized world where we oftentimes want people to be delighted or terrible. We don't allow for people to live in the space between, or the liminal space. And I think that liminal space is where there's such a possibility for us to create new ways of being.
Yeah, I love that. And I'm really excited about this particular scale. It's a little dated. It's from Hooper et al. 2009. And this will lead into my last question for you, Jen, which is around how do we get to or not get to these things. So listen to some of these items. Here's the instructions. I'll read out a list of ways you might have felt or behaved in the past week. I think that's an interesting delineation of time too. Please tell me how much of the time during the past week that you felt depressed, felt that everything you did was an effort, your sleep was restless, you were happy, you felt lonely, you enjoyed life, you felt sad, you could not get going, you had a lot of energy, you felt anxious, you felt tired, you felt absorbed in what you're doing, you felt calm and peaceful, you felt bored, and you felt really rested when you woke up in the morning. I think this is fascinating. First off, there's both positive and negative. It's a scoring nightmare. I think from a psychometric standpoint, I would for negatively worded items, but that's just me. That's me nerding out. But it covers these very big aspects of essentially what makes someone who we are. It's the core of being a human being, going back to your being and doing examples. And so all this is to say, what should those watching out there be doing, whether people leader, team leader, HR, just wanting to spread wellness across your organization regardless of where you stand? What could people be doing to bring more workplace wellness into their lives?
Yeah, so I'm gonna kind of kick this one a little bit back to you, because I think the first thing that people need to be doing is fostering accountability. And I mean that in a multi-tiered way, and I want them to consider multiple factors. So I think that the first is really looking at intentionality, because we know that intention, while it is less important than impact in racial justice work, oftentimes intention is where we're setting what we desire to have come out of a situation. And if we are intentional, at least at the onset, we can aim for an impact that's going to be meaningful and valuable, with respect to well-being and inclusivity. And so I think that weaving those together and figuring out ways to foster accountability is the very first step that I think people in workplace environments need to do. And so probably Mattingly Solutions is the place to like have people really turn to figure out like what does it look like to foster accountability about really holding the both and the multiplicities of this work, so that it is revolutionary and it's impactful, not in a way that is harmful and or perpetuating status quo.
1,000 times yes. So two things. First off, what I said before about how subjective, like workplace wellness does make sense to measure as a self-reported item. So how much do I agree or disagree with those items I shared before? And that's not always the best way to measure, right? And that's why I was excited that it was, because in the case of accountability, which is also in the case of inclusion, because how we talk about inclusion in our book Inclusalytics, shout out, but also just how we do our work at Mattingly, is inclusion is a behavioral construct. Inclusion is what you do. So it makes zero sense to ask a leader, how inclusive of a leader are you on a scale of 1 to 5? You're always going to put 5. Everyone wants to think they're the best. I don't care if you think you're the best. You might genuinely believe it. What matters is, are people, particularly your subordinates, observing you behave in inclusive ways, and observing you behave in a way that makes others feel valued, respected, seen, and heard. And so it should be an other report variable. I see how Jen treats me. I see how Sertrice treats me, or whatever, whoever it is, and that should be the metric. And so same goes with the accountability piece. So the best way to get workplace wellness to take off is what I've seen in the DEI space and just organizational psych in general. You put some sort of monetary value on what you're trying to get these to do. So if 80% of their division hasn't signed up for the workplace wellness initiative, well, you know what? You're not getting 20% of your bonus this year. I guarantee they'll hit the 80%, if not 95% of getting people to sign up for the initiative or something, right? So like, how do we tie to compensation? That's gold standard. Not always possible. How do we at least build it in to some sort of performance management? I know with inclusion, at least I'm seeing a lot more items getting at inclusive leadership for how leaders are being evaluated, which then impacts whether they're going to get their promotion, whether they get the bonus. But ways that are observable, ways that are transparent. If you're going to make a commitment, I'm not sure, you really know better, like the outcome measures, or like the type of work that gets done, but making those data publicly available, at least internally. We got 90% participation. We've lost 2,000 pounds. Like, I don't know. I'm not the wellness expert.
Right.
But the TLDR is just, you have to be able to observe these behaviors. It needs to be above and beyond any, I think that's a good idea or not, because that's not enough. It's what results are we seeing, and how are we holding leaders accountable for those results?
Yeah, and I think that brings me to the second item I would mention, which is, I think, really like it's like figuring out the daily components that like every person is reliant upon. And so that's why I have such a deep commitment to using, with the High Vibe Healing Collective, the concept of breathing belonging. And I really want people not only to breathe belonging, but I want people to like use the breath as a source of inspiration and a source of innovation, so they can get creative in the ways in which they're showing up in the workplace. So if you have a project or a team that feels like they're stagnated at like a point in a project that really needs some an infusion of new ideas, and also just like kind of a new directive, sometimes it's helpful to like take people's responsibilities, titles, roles, and all of the things that feel like pressure points that are really reinforced in our status quo ways of being and in our socialization, as like that hierarchical component we talked about earlier, it takes that out of the picture when we bring it back to the breath, because the breath is something that everyone has, and we all breathe unconsciously and consciously. It's the one system in our body that does that. And we do that in ways that, like, I think sometimes we're holding our breath, or we are shallow breathing when we're in workplace environments that are stressful, or where there's toxicity or there's a hostility in the work environment. And so to have somebody come in and facilitate breath work and breathing and hold that space where people can actually just have a moment to breathe, and really breathe, whether it's into their own care of their well-being, or breathe into their own creativity, or into their innovation, or into their own wisdom. It's a source and an opportunity for them to not only reduce their stress, where the studies have shown it increases, like, their emotional resilience and a capacity for somebody to actually engage in an emotionally intelligent way in the workplace. And I think it's also just overall improving the well-being for a person, because they know that they're cared for, and that the company has invested in their very well-being and in their breath, in the very force that gives them life and is the substance and base of their existence, because without the breath, they would no longer be here. And so I think it's really important for people to understand integration of breath work as a form of not only well-being, but also as an intentional tool for belonging, begins first with me, where I breathe belonging into myself, so that then I can breathe belonging into the collective of the team I'm working on. So that is the second action that I really believe is like a workplace wellness hack and a tip that you can use for all of your teams, and in ways that's going to be actually revolutionizing the way in which you show up. And I know we're like at the third option, and this is the one that actually excites me, because it's the way we began today. And it really is showing up with an intentionality and a mindfulness and a presence, and inviting people at the beginning of every meeting to just arrive and figure out, how are people arriving? And maybe someone isn't able to fully arrive because they're coming from having dropped off a child who was screaming and tantruming when they let them off at the daycare, or maybe it's like they had dropped off a child who just told them that they were being bullied at their school environment, where, maybe they actually just came from elder caregiving, and they're arriving into the meeting, and the elder that they were caregiving for had a major fall and is now having to be sent to the hospital. We never know where people are coming when they're entering into our workplaces and our workspaces. And so if you give a moment for people to just surrender and pause, so that they can enter very consciously and intentionally, with the opportunity to be like, I'm not fully here right now, and it's okay for me to just be here in body, if that's what you want. But if you're okay with it, I may take a pass on this meeting, and I'll follow up on the recording or the meeting notes, or somebody can hopefully fill me in, because I'm not able to show up with my entire presence and my full mindfulness. And so I think that there is a presencing of practices that will then also allow for people to be able to be seen, be affirmed, and feel valued in their workplaces, because you care about their wellness and their well-being.
I love it. And we all benefit from that. We all
That's right.
benefit.
That's right.
I could talk to you about workplace wellness and the intersections with inclusion and belonging all day, but we unfortunately are at time.
Yeah.
For those out there who are interested in exploring more about what breath work, mindfulness work, your overall practice is about, what's the best place for them to get in touch with you?
If they reach out, the High Vibe Healing Collective.com is my website. So it's high, HIGH, vibe, VIBE, collective, or healing, HEALING, collective, COLLECTIVE.com. You'll be able to find me there. Also, you can reach out via LinkedIn, certainly look forward to the opportunities to breathe new ways and breathe belonging with you and your teams.
Thank you. Thank you again for joining us. And thanks for all you do to help us be better humans at work, Jen.
Thank you. I appreciate it, Dr. V. Have a wonderful